Enjoy historical stories on the History Fix platform. Explore movies, short films, and documentaries. Addressing Gettysburg podcast fans receive an extra $5 off the first year's annual subscription. Sign up at historyfix.com and use promo code Gettysburg. Every subscription includes a 7-day risk-free trial. Escape into history with History Fix.
The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the Great Battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house and have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your visit. Check them out at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options and their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order. That's 82 Cafe at 82 Steinway Avenue across from the Dobbin House or raggededgerc.com.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott, narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. All free episodes of Addressing Gettysburg are brought to you by our sponsors and our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. To become a sponsor, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com. And to be a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg today. And we thank you in advance.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you all here. How's everybody doing? Good, good. Well, as always, welcome to Gettysburg National Military Park. Whether you're here in person or whether you're watching online, it's always a pleasure to see so many folks out to talk about the American Civil War, to talk about the Battle of Gettysburg, to talk about, in our case today, Little Round Top. So my name is Christopher Gwinn. I'm the Chief of Interpretation and Education here at the Battlefield Park. And again, I'm so happy that you'll be with me for the next 45 to 50 minutes. I'm not on a Matt Atkinson times Chris Gwinn, punctual, scheduled. So that's what we're going to try to do today. I want to begin after the American Civil War on October 3rd of 1889. That, in case you don't know, was a very special day in Gettysburg history. That is Maine Day. That's when all of the veterans from the state of Maine traveled back to the Gettysburg battlefield to dedicate their monuments. And most northern states who had a lot of men who fought at Gettysburg, who had funds given to them by the state to erect those monuments, did something very similar. So Michigan Day at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania Day at Gettysburg, and again, this is an opportunity for all of these veterans and their families and their kids to travel down to the battlefield in Pennsylvania to watch them set aside these monuments to where they fought, July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 1863, to where their comrades died. And so October 3rd of that year is Maine Day. And it, for the individuals involved, was a very mournful but also celebratory experience. They traveled around the battlefield. They dedicated their monuments, the 16th Maine, the 20th Maine, the 17th Maine in the wheat field. And that evening, at the Gettysburg Courthouse on Baltimore Street, they had their kind of, I would call it a keynote. Sometimes they called it a bivouac or a campfire, but it's when they all got together for a lot of oratory, a lot of speechifying, where the veterans would get up and talk about what the day meant to them, what the battle meant to them. And the presiding officer that day was going to give the big speech. And that, of course, is none other than our friend Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He's somewhat obscure. He gives a speech that day that is was quite long. It's a rather good speech. I'm only going to quote a part of it for you today, and chances are you've heard it before, because it is used ad nauseum, to the point where it's almost cliche. So we have it in our museum on this big wall right as you exit. In the 1990s, the United States Mint put out a commemorative coin focused around battlefield preservation, and they use this quote. And I think it's used so much because it's so darn good. And what Chamberlain is doing as he concludes this big speech is he's talking about what places like Gettysburg mean, what they are. And he's very prophetic. So you can read it up on the screen there. If you can't see it at home, I'll read it to you. In great deeds, something abides. On great fields, something stays. Forms change and pass. Bodies disappear, but spirits linger to consecrate the ground for the vision place of souls. And reverend men and women from afar and generations that know us not and that we know not of, heart drawn to see where and by whom great things were suffered and done for them, shall come to this deathless field to ponder and dream. The dude could write. I mean, he had a way with words. And it's almost Gettysburg Address-esque, Lincoln-esque. Chamberlain, in his speech, he doesn't say what a great field is. He doesn't call out any specific battlefield. He doesn't exactly define what those great deeds are. And so for Chamberlain, it might have been Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg. It might be the White Oak Road or Five Forks. But chances are Joshua Chamberlain is talking about Little Round Top. That's why he was in Gettysburg, to dedicate the 20th Maine Monument, to talk to other Gettysburg veterans. And for Joshua Chamberlain, and for many, many, many of the other men that fought on Little Round Top on July 2nd, 1863 and survived, their 90 minutes on Little Round Top were the defining moments of their lives. Everything before and after was postscript and prologue. For Joshua Chamberlain, his time on Little Round Top, that's what defines him. It's not the governorship of Maine. It's not even necessarily accepting the surrender at Appomattox. It's Little Round Top. And again, he's very prophetic. Little Round Top was incredibly important to him. Again, that idea of physically going to the hill to commune with the dead, the vision place of souls, going somewhere physical where it connects you to the past. That's what we still do today, 160 years later. Visitors are still, well, not right now, but 160 years later, visitors are still coming to the battlefield to see Little Round Top in particular, to commune with that place. Now, Matt Callery of Addressing Gettysburg, who's in the front audience here, he once asked me a question that I thought was incredibly profound, and I didn't have a good answer for it. The question was, why Gettysburg? Why Gettysburg? And I'm going to try to answer a question today based off of that. Why Little Round Top? Why are we so, as Americans, especially as aficionados of the American Civil War, why are we so drawn to that hill and that story? What is it about Little Round Top that captivates us? And I'll probably pose more questions than I'll answer, but I think it's an interesting question to ask. We did a visitor use study. This is one of these big government bureaucratic reports that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. We did a visitor use study in 2017 and 2018. And we were trying to figure out, why do people come to Gettysburg? Where do they go? Where are they visiting? And that report, if it's accurate, shows us that the most popular spot on the Gettysburg battlefield, more than this building, is Little Round Top. We estimated that 90% of all visitors who come to Gettysburg to visit the battlefield park, 90% go to Little Round Top. That equates pre-COVID to roughly 1 million people a year. No other site in the park even comes close to that, including this building. Why? Why? If you're a battlefield guide, if you're a visitor to Gettysburg and you go up to Little Round Top, you've seen this. A day in May, you're literally swimming through 8th graders. You're parking on the far side of the hill. There's, one of the reasons we're doing this big battlefield rehabilitation effort up there is because over 160 years, the hill has literally been loved to death. Why? Why? I think there are a couple reasons. And what I'd like to do today is go through those. So one, why is Little Round Top so famous? Why are we drawn to it? the geology and geography of the place itself, it's interesting. It's this unique landscape at Gettysburg. It's almost unique in terms of American Civil War battlefields. I won't go quite so far as to say that. But even if you knew nothing about the American Civil War or the Battle of Gettysburg, you could still go to Little Round Top. Leave your car in the parking lot, emerge on the summit, and be just blown away by the view, the battlefield stretching out before you. So the geology, the geography of the hill. Of course, the battle. Without the battle, we're not here. There's probably housing development where we're standing. But more than that, I think the participants of the battle, how the battle was remembered, and how the veterans who survived the battle shaped the narrative there, and the commemorative landscape, as we call it, that's the monuments and memorials on the hill, that plays a huge role. And perhaps, more than anything else, popular culture. Popular culture, films, novels, TV shows, they're going to drive visitation. They're going to create heroes. They're going to create folk heroes and myth and legend. Hamilton Grange, National Historic Site. It's in New York. Has anybody ever been there? A few years back, their visitation, it's where Alexander Hamilton lived. Their visitation increased 174%. Why do you think that was? Not because of a ranger program, because of something else. Popular culture drives visitation to Civil War sites. So let's explore these topics and see if we can answer that question. Why Little Round Top? So geography and geology. I am not a geologist. I'm barely even a historian sometimes. So take this with a grain of salt. But the forces that create Little Round Top go back 200 million years. And as these tectonic plates shift, they create something called the Gettysburg Formation, the Gettysburg Sill. This is an area of sandstone and siltstone that over time, magma bubbling up from the surface, they fill in the gaps in this formation. And it cools, and it creates this really hard diabase rock, this granite. And over eons and the millenniums of time, all that loose stuff, erosion washes that away. It erodes that away. And so you end up with this very peculiar rock formation that cuts its way through the Gettysburg battlefield. So again, the forces that create the battlefield where Meade and Lee are going to fight take place 200 million years ago. So Little Round Top is incredibly old. That diabase rock, it's some of the oldest substances that you can find in Pennsylvania. The first inhabitants of what we would call Little Round Top are the Susquehannock tribe, indigenous peoples. We have archaeological sites in Adams County that go back to 6,500 years ago. And so I say that only to remind you all that there's lots of layers of history at Gettysburg, not just the American Civil War. By about 1675, the Susquehannocks are essentially gone as a kind of political entity here. And by 1750, there's virtually no Native Americans left in Adams County. Of course, that coincides with colonial settlement. The first settlers around Little Round Top would be the Scots-Irish. And they are mostly subsistence farmers. And if you are a subsistence farmer, what do you need? You need land. You need water. More than anything, though, you need arable land. You need land that you can actually farm. And God bless the poor dude that tries to farm on Little Round Top. It is not going to happen for you. And so for most of its history, Little Round Top, it's not valuable as a farm, as a place of agriculture, but you could use it as a woodlot, as a managed woodlot. You could use it to graze your animals as pasture. And that's what the landowners prior to the American Civil War do with Little Round Top. Records are very difficult to ascertain in terms of land ownership. We know that by the early 1800s, there's a gentleman by the name of Conrad Hoke who owns most of what we would call the Little Round Top area today. Over the course of the 19th century, that chunk of land he owns gets kind of chopped up and sold, so that on the eve of the Battle of Gettysburg, we have really three landowners that are controlling Little Round Top. Jacob Weichert, George Bushman, and most significant for our story today, Ephraim Hanaway. Ephraim Hanaway doesn't live on Little Round Top. He owns the western face of it, so the famous face. And at some point prior to the American Civil War, prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, he clears that western face of trees. So they remove all the wood. There's some speculation that it was part of an army contract. There's no documentation to prove that. John Batchelder, in his guidebook, Gettysburg, What to See and How to See It, he alludes to the fact that it's the year before the battle that western face is cleared of trees by Hanaway. We don't know that either. We do know at some point it's cleared of trees. William Frasinito, in his book, Gettysburg, Early Photography at Gettysburg, believes that it was actually probably a few years before the Battle of Gettysburg, because he could look at some of the photos and tell there's a lot of scrub brush and smaller trees that have grown up on that face, which leads him to believe that probably wasn't in 1862, a little bit earlier. It's going to be that decision to remove trees from the western face that's going to make Little Round Top significant and valuable for the men of the Army of the Potomac. Because now you have an artillery platform, you have a place of observation, you have something that the armies can use. That's what transforms Little Round Top into a place that's going to be important. Otherwise, it would probably be like Big Round Top, of limited utility for the armies. And then, of course, there's the image I was talking about of the western face. This is what Ephraim Hanaway owns. All right, the battle, July 2nd, 1863. Now, this is a story that I hope most of you are familiar with. So I'm going to give you the generally agreed upon chronology of the Battle of Gettysburg, or the Battle of Little Round Top, if there is such a thing. So it's the late afternoon, July 2nd, 1863. George Gordon Meade discovers that Daniel Edgar Sickles and his 3rd Corps have advanced beyond their assigned position. Little Round Top apparently is left uncovered. At about that same time, James Longstreet is going to launch his massive attack on the Union left with the better part of 18,000 men ultimately. And that's going to set in motion the chain of events that result in the battle for Little Round Top. At some point, Gouverneur Warren, chief topographical engineer of the Army of the Potomac, will be sent to Little Round Top to figure out what the heck is going on. And then what follows is a series of crises. First crisis is Warren gets to the top and figures out there's nobody up on Little Round Top. And the Confederate line of battle on Seminary Ridge extends far beyond the position of Sickles' 3rd Corps below, which of course means the hill is in danger. And no sooner does he make this realization than he sees bodies of Confederate infantry moving towards his position. And so the story of Little Round Top devolves into a race. Reinforcements are called. First troops to arrive for the Army of the Potomac is the 3rd Brigade, 1st Division, 5th Corps. This is Strong Vincent's Brigade, composed of the 16th Michigan, 44th New York, 83rd Pennsylvania, and of course the 20th Maine. They take position on the lower shelf of the hill 5 to 15 minutes before the Confederate attack begins. So when you go up to Little Round Top today, you see the rock walls and the fortifications that were built up. Those aren't there when Vincent's Brigade arrives on the hill. Those aren't there during the actual Battle of Little Round Top. Those are built after. Other reinforcements arrive, primarily the battery of Charles Hazlitt. They drag their guns up to the hill. And then again, another crisis occurs. Confederate troops strike Vincent's brigade, and both ends of Vincent's battle line start to ever slowly give way. On his right, this is the view of the Confederates attacking the hill. The Confederates who assault Little Round Top are primarily composed of 2 brigades. One is Evander Law's Alabama Brigade, and the other is the Texas Brigade, only a portion of that. They have arguably the most difficult terrain to contend with anywhere on the Gettysburg battlefield. And when you read the accounts of the Alabamians and Texans who fought there, I mean, they talk about Little Round Top as a mountain, right? It's a mountain. One soldier described it, it looked like a volcano with smoke and flames spewing into the air. Little Round Top's a difficult place to fight if you're a Texan, if you're an Alabamian. On Vincent's right, the 16th Michigan, led by Colonel Norval Welch, begins to give way. It's the weakest regiment in Vincent's brigade. They're slowly kind of outflanked by the attacking Confederates. They fall back to a little shelf that today is right below the 44th New York Monument. And it's at that moment that Strong Vincent, seeing this unfold, rushes to that sector of the battlefield to try to shore up the 16th Michigan and is mortally wounded. Ultimately, though, more Union reinforcements arrive. Of course, this is Patrick O'Rourke and the 140th New York, who climb up the backside of the hill, charge into the advancing Confederates, and secure Vincent's right flank. At the far left end of the line, of course, is Joshua Chamberlain and his 350 men from Maine. They are the extreme left of the Union Army, the Army of the Potomac. They are assaulted, attacked first by the 47th Alabama, and then by Colonel William C. Oates in his 15th Alabama. Chamberlain has to refuse his battle line to meet this new threat. After approximately 90 minutes to 2 hours of combat, the men of the 20th Maine, who have suffered severe casualties, are running low on ammunition. A bayonet charge occurs, which drives the Confederates from the slope, essentially securing that end of Vincent's line on Little Round Top, and thus ends the story of the Battle of Little Round Top as far as we are concerned today. It was not a long battle. Again, 90 minutes. We're going to be in here, about half of that time, so it's not a terribly long battle. In terms of overall combatants, we're talking about 3,700 men. Compare that to the wheat field, to the fighting at Culp's Hill on July 2nd and July 3rd. This is a small little battle. It's a small little battle. And I think that's one of the things that makes Little Round Top consumable for visitors. Americans like their history simple, and ideally in little sound bites that make sense to them. And Little Round Top is kind of that, right? It's a small battle. It's easy to understand. It has this interesting chronology to it. There's this narrative that drives the story. It's like a race. So I think Americans like that. Of course, the reality is much more complex, as we're about to see, but it's a relatively small battle. The casualties in the wheat field far exceed that. The casualties fighting around the peach orchard far exceed that. So it's a small engagement in 90 minutes. Roughly 1,185 casualties, including 279 killed. And thus, the Battle of Little Round Top shifts from an experience that was lived to an experience that is going to be remembered by those that survived the fight. And two things happen in the immediate aftermath of the fighting at Little Round Top in the Battle of Gettysburg. One, Little Round Top becomes some of the earliest preserved battlefield land at Gettysburg. Ephraim Hanaway sells his roughly 77 acres to the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association in 1864. Again, this is a group of influential citizens who want to set the battlefield aside to honor the Union cause of the Union dead as a memorial to those who fought there. And some of the first land they buy is at Little Round Top. That makes sense. You could go to Little Round Top and see the remnants of combat, the rock walls built up by the troops who fought there. The vista is still incredible. It's an alluring landscape, which is part of the reason why early photographers are drawn to Little Round Top. Matthew Brady, Alexander Gardner, they all photographed that area. So the hill's preserved. And then, right after the battle, let me go back one. The men that survive try to piece together what they went through. And they try to make sense of it. What did I experience on the hill? Now, first, the earliest accounts of the battle are either soldiers writing very quickly, I survived, everybody's safe, Jack Calloway died, something like that. And then the official reports that the officers involved are going to write. So Joshua Chamberlain, for example, he writes his first official report of the fighting at Little Round Top on July 6th, 1863. So these are the first accounts of the fighting there. And another thing to point out, no one knows what to call the hill. Little Round Top's in common usage today. It is very likely that that name existed at the time of the battle. Edward Everett, for example, in his November 1863 Gettysburg Address, he refers to Little Round Top. Michael Jacobs, who wrote notes on the invasion of Pennsylvania, refers to it as Little Round Top. For others, it's the Rocky Ridge, Sugarloaf Knob. It goes by about a dozen names. But those earliest accounts are the officers writing about what they went through. And for a lot of the soldiers who fought there, when they remembered the fighting on Little Round Top, what really stuck out to them more than anything were these sensory moments. So there's a gentleman by the name of Porter Farley. He's the adjutant of the 140th New York. And he would write about the sulfurous fumes of the battle, the smell of it. William C. Oates, who battles Joshua Chamberlain, would write about these coagulated pools of blood on the rocks. Other soldiers would recall the click of bayonets, that metallic sound locking into place. And so that sensory component was very vivid for a lot of soldiers. But then, like I said, they tried to figure out what they had gone through, what they had survived, and they tried to create a logical order to it and a logical sequence of events. And over time, they found that to be increasingly difficult to do. because that very simple story I told you about, that visitors like, that soundbite, that narrative that makes sense and flows, that is an illusion. Little Round Top is as confusing and contradictory as any part of the Battle of Gettysburg. And we see that playing out in the post-war period. Another thing men tried to do is they tried to pick out the heroes. These are the guys that changed the tide of events on Little Round Top. And then they kind of spent the rest of their lives battling other dudes who said, well, no, it was somebody else that was the real hero. And then it begins immediately after the battle. One of the early heroes to emerge from the Battle of Little Round Top, Gouverneur Warren, chief topographical engineer of the Army of the Potomac. Born in Cold Springs, New York, he is all of 33 years old at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. A brilliant man, graduate of West Point. Spent some time as a mathematics professor at West Point. He's originally the colonel of the 5th New York, Dury's, I believe it is. Fights at Big Bethel. A capable leader. He was not an imposing figure. When you read about accounts of Gouverneur Warren, what he looked like, he's often described as sickly, sometimes as effeminate. There's a lot of quotes about Winfield Scott Hancock by soldiers who said, Hancock, if you looked at him in battle, you felt calm. Hancock's a guy that, even if he were in civilian clothes, you'd still follow his orders. No one says that about Gouverneur Warren. At least not that I found. No one says that. But he's a very capable officer. He's made, again, chief engineer of the Army of the Potomac. During the Gettysburg campaign, he actually leaves the armies in mid-June to go to Baltimore to get married to a woman named Emily Forbes Chase. So in any other conceivable scenario, Gouverneur Warren on July 2nd would probably have been on his honeymoon. But instead, he's climbing up the rocky slopes of Little Round Top. Remember, he's dispatched to go to the Hill to figure out what's going on. And we can't even agree on who sent him to Little Round Top. If you read one account, George Meade sends him there. If you read Warren, well, he said he went there on his own accord. And there's no consensus, even with something as small as that. Warren never writes a whole lot about the Battle of Gettysburg, as we'll see. Doesn't write a whole lot about the battle. He dies fairly young. He dies in 1882 at the age of, I want to say 52. He never writes a lot about the battle. But he does write one letter to that adjutant of the 140th New York that I mentioned, a man by the name of Porter Farley. And in this letter, which was never meant for publication, he describes his big role in the fighting of Little Round Top. That's arriving on the hill and figuring out the hill's empty and the hill's in danger. The Confederates are on the opposite ridge. And it's a great account. It's a very kind of vivid description of the moment. And this is Warren's version of him discovering the Confederates. He writes to Farley, I requested the captain of a rifle battery just in front of Little Round Top to fire a shot into the woods. He did so, and as the shot went whistling through the air, the sound of it reached the enemy's troops and caused everyone to look in the direction of it. The motion revealed to me the glistening of gun barrels and bayonets of the enemy's line of battle, already formed and far outflanking the position of any of our troops, so that the line of his advance from his right to Little Round Top was unopposed. I have been particular in telling this, as the discovery was intensely thrilling to my feelings and almost appalling. So that's Warren's story, as written in a letter to Porter Farley. And in that version, who's the hero? Gouverneur Warren. I arrived, some Signal Corps guys. I come up with this great plan to fire artillery round over the trees. All the Rebs look at it. I see their line of battle. And then I set in motion reserves coming to defend the hill. It's Gouverneur Warren's story. Do you believe it? How many people believe it? That's how it happened. Maybe. There's another version of this story. It's written by a guy named Captain James Hall. Now, James Hall is one of the signalmen that was up on Little Round Top on July 2nd, manning that signal station, reporting to George Meade, the Army commander, the movements of the Confederates on the opposite side of the battlefield. And this account is a little bit different. According to this, which is published in the History of the Signal Corps, it was Captain Hall's announcement that the enemy were moving around Sickles' left that brought General Warren to Little Round Top. So Warren didn't do it of his own accord. Meade didn't do it. It was Captain Hall. When he reached the station, the enemy were under cover and were scarcely visible except to eyes accustomed to the use of field glasses. Captain Hall found it very difficult to convince General Warren that the enemy's infantry and artillery were there concealed, and while the discussion was in progress, the enemy opened up on the station. The first shell burst close to the station, and the general, a moment later, was wounded in the neck. Captain Hall then exclaimed, "Now do you see them?" So in Captain Hall's version, Warren shows up, and Hall can look through a telescope, and he can see Confederates over there, and then apparently Warren can't figure out how to look through the glass, and a moment later, a Confederate shell lands on the hill. Warren suddenly realizes, oh, there are Confederates over there after all. And so who is the hero of Little Round Top in this account? It's the signalmen, the signal guys. They're the ones that figured it out. Again, something very, very simple. Who found out the Confederates are on the opposite ridge? You have two very, very different accounts of how that unfolded. Warren, though, when you think about what he has in his military career to be proud of, it's Little Round Top. Because, as I think most of us know, on April 2nd, 1865, the end of the American Civil War, Gouverneur Warren is commander of the 5th Army Corps. 8 days to go till Lee surrenders. At a battle called Five Forks, he is removed from command by Philip Sheridan. And so literally on the eve of the end of the war, in ignominy, he's removed from command, and he will spend the rest of his life trying to repair his tarnished reputation. He demands courts of inquiry into his removal by Sheridan, which President Ulysses S. Grant kind of ignores. It's not until Chester A. Arthur, years later, that Warren gets his inquiry and that he's cleared of all charges. They found that Sheridan was wrong. Of course, he's not alive at that point in time to benefit from it. But for Gouverneur Warren, Little Round Top, that was his shining moment in the sun. That was the pinnacle of his military career. Now today you go up to Little Round Top, and what do you find? The Gouverneur Warren statue. I think it's one of the best statues, best commemorative works on the battlefield. It's very heroic looking. He looks kind of like a Superman up there on the boulder, hardly the sickly, effeminate portrait that a lot of his contemporaries painted. And it's the most site-specific of any monument on the Gettysburg battlefield, any kind of statuary. That's allegedly the boulder that he stood on. And so you can go up to that, and if you're the average visitor, the statue of Gouverneur Warren that dominates that stretch of the hill. Now, meanwhile, that's the only boulder we tell people don't climb on. It's the only one. If you got shot at by Confederates, you can climb on it. So this is 1913, during the 50th anniversary of the battle. But that's the monument to the Signal Corps guys. It's the plaque on the boulder, right? So imagine if they had a grander monument, how that might change the experience of visiting Little Round Top, if they had something to compete with the epic statue of Gouverneur Warren. Now Warren, though, will not be the only man who's lionized for his role on Little Round Top. Another man is Charles Hazlett, commander of Battery D, 5th United States Artillery. They're the 6 guns that are ordered to the summit of Little Round Top by Augustus P. Martin, who's the brigade commander, the artillery brigade commander in the 5th Corps. Hazlett is known, and his story is known for 2 reasons. One, getting his guns up on top of Little Round Top. There's no, Sykes Avenue doesn't exist in 1863. There is a logging road that is on the hill somewhere, and no one knows for sure where it was. But other than that, that's the only way to the top. And Hazlett is ordered to bring his guns up there. So he's got his caissons, he's got his limbers, he's got to get it all up the hill. And when the men of Hazlett's battery wrote about the Battle of Gettysburg, they spend far more time talking about physically getting the guns up the hill than they talk about the battle itself. Because for them, that was the Herculean task. That was the big effort, getting their pieces up the hill. So a couple of good quotes. One is by Benjamin Rittenhouse, who's second in command of Hazlett's battery. And he's at West Point after the American Civil War, and a cadet asks him how he got the guns up the hill. And Rittenhouse responds, "It was during the battle when everything was red hot. The battery was ordered to that point, and that we went there to trot each man and horse trying to pull the whole battery by himself." At one point in time, there's at least one account that has Gouverneur Warren grabbing a wheel trying to get the guns up the hill to the summit. Best quote of all those by Warren, who allegedly says to Augustus P. Martin, "Martin, how the hell did you get the guns up here?" which is a question visitors ask today when you go there. Now, another thing, when you go to the summit of Little Round Top today and you see the marker to Hazlitt's battery and where the guns are, that's not where the guns were. That's where the War Department put the guns. If you're an artilleryman, if you're Charles Hazlitt, you get your gun up to the summit, that's only part of the challenge. Now you got to figure out, okay, where are you going to put the gun where it's not going to topple over, where you're not going to hit a boulder, where it can recoil and it's not going to roll down the hill. And so he's opportunistic. He puts a gun wherever the hill can accommodate. The hill is actually much more rocky in 1863 than it is today. 160 years of repairs and rehabilitations and parking lots have really changed the nature of the hill. But when you go there today, oh, looks like that's where the guns were. Very different in 1863. So physically getting the guns up there, it's a challenge. At one point in time, Warren allegedly turns to Hazlitt and says, Hazlitt, this is no place for efficient artillery fire. And Hazlitt says something to the effect of, never mind that, the sound of my guns alone will be discouraging to the enemy and heartening to our troops, or something to that effect.
For the Historian has a wide variety of titles, new and used, of military books from publishers like Osprey, Gettysburg Publishing, Stackpole, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more. I make it a point to go there once a week because I have new bookshelves to fill and I never know what treasures I'll find, and neither will you. They even have toy soldiers, model kits, games, children's books, and more. So stop by and check them out on your next visit to Gettysburg, or better yet, order right now online at forthehistorian.com and mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund you your shipping. And if you call 717-685-5207 or stop by the store on your next visit and mention us, you'll get 20% off retail price. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There you'll find apparel, decor, and gear, and our listeners will receive 10% off plus free shipping within the U.S. if you use promo code GBERG1863 at checkout. So take advantage of this deal at trhistorical.com. TR Historical, for the love of history.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Hey Gettysburg business owners, winter is just around the bend, and you know what that means, no tourists. But just because people aren't coming to you doesn't mean you can't bring your business to them. If you ship, you're still in the game. And if you're a seasonal business, the time to advertise for your next season is in the off-season when people are making their plans. So what's an affordable yet highly effective way of reaching those people? Well, it's not radio. It's not TV, and it's certainly not print. Step out of the Jurassic era of advertising and run an ad on Addressing Gettysburg. We just reached 1 million downloads, and we're growing by the tens of thousands every month. Beyond that, our audience is happy to support those who support their favorite podcast. So email sales@addressinggettysburg for more information about advertising on our show. We look forward to helping your business grow. That's sales@addressinggettysburg.com.
And Hazlitt figures out he can't even depress his barrels enough to actually hit any Confederates coming up the hill. But he mans his guns, and it costs him ultimately his life. The other reason we remember Hazlitt is that at one moment in the battle, reinforcements arrive, and this is the brigade of Stephen Weed. And while Weed's on the summit, he's hit by a Confederate bullet and topples to the ground, mortally wounded. And he calls over for Hazlitt. And Hazlitt, according to an article in the New York Tribune, which is the earliest account I've seen of this, bends over the body of Weed, and as he's bending over to hear what might be Weed's dying words, Hazlitt is shot and killed. His dead body falls on top of that of his friend. And Hazlitt is dead, and Weed is dead. Why Little Round Top? That big question. One of the reasons I think Little Round Top becomes enshrined very early on in our kind of national consciousness is the fact that it becomes this de facto site of Union martyrdom. There are not a tremendous number of casualties at Little Round Top, as we saw, but there are a very high number of high-ranking Union casualties. So we talked about Hazlitt. We talked about Weed. In a moment, we're going to talk about Patrick O'Rourke and Strong Vincent. There's no other spot, I would argue, on the Gettysburg battlefield that has such a concentration of these high-ranking Union casualties as at Little Round Top. And so very early on, Little Round Top becomes almost like Canterbury Cathedral in medieval England. It's a place you go on pilgrimage to venerate these dead heroes. First monument on the battlefield, proper, as we shall see, is on Little Round Top to one of these slain men. So Little Round Top is a place of martyrdom for the Union cause. Patrick O'Rourke. As I mentioned, there are a number of martyrs, one of which is Patrick O'Rourke. Graduate of West Point, graduates in 1861, top of his class. Widely regarded by the men in his command. He commands a little over 400 men on July 2nd, 1863. And as the fighting is unfolding, O'Rourke and his men, they're actually ordered to march down the Wheatfield Road. They're not intended to go to Little Round Top. But Gouverneur Warren is trying to find reinforcements to bring to the hill. He rushes down to the hill himself and sees a regiment that he used to command. It was in his old brigade. And at the head is Patrick O'Rourke, this young Irishman. And he orders O'Rourke to bring his men up the back slope of the hill to help the beleaguered defense of Little Round Top. And that's what O'Rourke does. He takes the orders on himself. They go up the hill in columns of 4. They have to go around Hazlitt's guns and his caissons. They never load their weapons. They never load their muskets. So they arrive on the top of Little Round Top with empty rifles. But then the 140th New York, as the 16th Michigan is falling back, will charge down the slopes and drive back those Texans and Alabamians at the cost of Patrick O'Rourke, who's shot in the neck and dies very soon after. One of the men that will really champion the memory of Patrick O'Rourke is his old adjutant, Porter Farley, who's at Little Round Top. He survives the battle, survives the war, goes on to become a very prominent doctor. But for Porter Farley, the hero of the Battle of Little Round Top is not Gouverneur Warren, it's not Charles Hazlitt, it is Patrick O'Rourke and the men of the 140th. And Farley would later write about the death of O'Rourke. He would say, "I never felt a grief so sharply, nor realized the significance of death so well. I choked with grief as I stood beside his lifeless form. For him to die was like me losing a brother." And more than that, he goes on to talk about the role of the 140th. He says, "In a word, Gettysburg might have been the greatest disaster of the war and might have turned the scales in favor of the rebellion. We of the 140th are so self-congratulatory as to think that the arrival of the Monitor at Hampton Roads, just when she did, was a circumstance no more fortunate for the Union cause than was our timely arrival to fill the gap just when, and as we did on Little Round Top at Gettysburg, the service rendered there must be regarded as the supreme event in our existence." One of the things that's really interesting to note is how, for a lot of the men that fought at Little Round Top, that moment was, again, the supreme moment of their existence, as Farley writes about. But they elevate the importance of Little Round Top to such lofty proportions that it's almost inconceivable. So there are a lot of men that write about Little Round Top and say that if the Confederates had taken it, the Union Army would have been defeated at the Battle of Gettysburg. And maybe they're true. There are some accounts of the Battle of Little Round Top that say if Confederates get the hill, and if they can hold it, the very democracy, the very experiment in American democracy crumbles to dust. You know, it becomes this post-apocalyptic society if the Confederates get Little Round Top, which of course is an exaggeration. But I think for the men that fought there, that's the level of significance they attribute to what they did on July 2nd, 1863. We saved the United States at Little Round Top. Historians debate that today. You know, how important was Little Round Top? What would the Confederates have done if they captured the hill? You know, and that's an interesting debate to have. I'm not a military historian, so I don't want to wade too far into that. But as far as the veterans who fought there are concerned, supreme significance. Little Round Top was the key to the Union battle line. But not everybody agreed with Porter Farley that O'Rourke was the real hero. There's another young man named Oliver Wilcox Norton. Now, Oliver Wilcox Norton plays a very big role in crafting the memory of the Battle of Little Round Top. He is the bugler on Strong Vincent's staff. And as far as Oliver Wilcox Norton is concerned, the real hero, it's not Warren, it's not Hazlitt, it's not O'Rourke, it's Strong Vincent. It's that 26-year-old lawyer from Erie, Pennsylvania, who takes the initiative to lead his brigade to the hill, who selects the position for the brigade, and who gives his life fighting on Little Round Top. That's the real hero. And he has a quote here: "Vincent should be credited with an instant appreciation of the situation and a determination to carry out the orders of the Corps commanders without waiting for orders from the useless Barnes." Barnes is the division commander. One of the things that is debated in the post-war period is, how does Vincent's brigade get to Little Round Top? And there are two stories. One is the story of James Barnes, the division commander, who says, "I ordered Vincent to go to Little Round Top." The other story, which we hear from Oliver Wilcox Norton, is that it was Vincent who did it without orders, who took the initiative. It was Vincent who, having his brigade at the base of the hill, sees a staff officer racing around the battlefield, and who intercepts that staff officer, who demands that that staff officer give Vincent his orders, and who takes the initiative to lead his men to the summit. So two different versions of how that happens. What is not debatable is that Vincent does lead his brigade to the hill. He selects a position on the southern part of the hill, on the shelf that runs almost perpendicular to the main summit, and it's Vincent that selects the position. Vincent, he has this really great quote that's attributed to him. Allegedly, as the men of his brigade are marching to Gettysburg, they cross the Mason-Dixon line. So they leave Maryland, they enter Pennsylvania. And for Vincent, who's a Pennsylvanian, this is an important moment. So he orders the colors of the brigade uncased and unfurled, and he turns to a man next to him and says, "What death more glorious can any man desire than to die on the soil of old Pennsylvania fighting for that flag?" And I always thought, it's got to be apocryphal. What pitiful stuff. And again, 19th century is a time of great sentimentality. And so I always struggled to imagine Vincent saying that. But maybe it happened. Maybe it happened. Because he does write his wife earlier on in the campaign. And he says something very similar. He writes, "If I fall, remember, you have given your husband to the most righteous cause that ever widowed a woman." And of course, he does die. He's mortally wounded. Allegedly, as the 16th Michigan is falling back, Vincent rushes to his prominent boulder right behind their battle line. He doesn't have his sword that day. He just has his riding crop, allegedly a gift from his wife. And as he's waving the riding crop in the air, shouting out, "Don't give an inch," he's struck by a Confederate mini-ball. Mortally wounded. Dies on July 7th, 1863. Promoted to brigadier general, though I believe he was never aware of that promotion. Today, if you go up to Little Round Top, you might be able to find this inscription. It's allegedly the boulder that he stood on. The first monuments to the battlefield, on the battlefield proper, are really to Vincent. So this inscription could date as early as 1864. One of the earliest monuments on the battlefield. There's another monument just below the summit that also proclaims to be the spot where Vincent was mortally wounded. That's in 1878 that is dedicated. Oliver Wilcox Norton, that young bugler who was on Vincent's staff, he survives the battle, survives the war, and he will spend the rest of his life being the champion for the legacy of Strong Vincent. He will befriend Vincent's brother, his widow. He will be very instrumental in making sure that Vincent's legacy is enshrined on the Gettysburg battlefield. He will be involved in the creation of the monument to the 83rd Pennsylvania. He will speak at its dedication. And it's in part because of Oliver Wilcox Norton that you have that statue of Vincent on the 83rd Pennsylvania monument today, even though it's allegedly not Vincent, it's just the beau ideal of a soldier. Because they weren't allowed to put an actual person on the monument. And so they just put a guy that looks exactly like this dude on the monument. He will convince the Vincent family to donate Vincent's Gettysburg sword to the Smithsonian Institution. So they have it today. I don't think it's on display, but they are the caretakers of Vincent's Gettysburg sword. The Vincent family wanted to have it on display at the Pennsylvania State House. And Norton says, "No, the building's a den of thieves. Give it to the Smithsonian." And he wins the day. He will write a book. Oh, we'll go back to them. He'll write a book. One of the early micro-histories of the Battle of Gettysburg, the attack and defense of Little Round Top. And in terms of the historiography of the battle, this is a seminal work. It's one of the first real in-depth histories of the fighting at Little Round Top. And of course, in the book, that's the first time the Warren letter to Porter Farley is published. In the book, who's the hero of Little Round Top? Strong Vincent. That's who it is. And we still refer to that book today. But the story of Oliver Wilcox Norton, I think, also demonstrates the difficulty of trying to piece together the story of Little Round Top and the intersection between history and memory. One of my favorite letters associated with Vincent that we have in our collection is a letter to some veterans of the 83rd Pennsylvania written by Oliver Wilcox Norton. And I want to say the year is 1911 that he writes this. And these veterans, these survivors of the 83rd Pennsylvania, they want to put up a monument to where Strong Vincent was mortally wounded. And they write to Oliver Wilcox Norton, the bugler who was with Vincent allegedly. Surely he would know, and we can place this monument on the battlefield. Well, Norton responds to these guys and says, listen, there's already the boulder. There's already that other marker. He's already on the 83rd Pennsylvania. And these are all different locations. I think any more monuments are just going to get confusing. He also says that he wasn't with Vincent when he was hit, so he couldn't help him anyways. And then by 1911, he was completely blind. So even if he wanted to, he wouldn't be able to help him out on the hill. So we don't know actually where Vincent was wounded. You can go up there and take your pick. My pick's the boulder. But over time, men like Oliver Wilcox Norton and Porter Farley, they started to get frustrated because they saw other individuals claiming credit for the Battle of Little Round Top and the Union victory. They saw other monuments being placed. They saw avenues being created named after other individuals, which they thought was an affront to history. And there was no bigger offender than Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Joshua Chamberlain. He is, at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, 34 years old. And there is no way to make Joshua Chamberlain unimpressive. He's a brilliant guy. We all know that. He speaks 7 languages by the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, one of which is a variation of Aramaic, which I think is about as dead a language as you can get, but he speaks it. He, of course, becomes Lieutenant Colonel of 20th Maine, accedes to the colonelcy when Adelbert Ames leaves for the 11th Corps. He leads the 350 men of the 20th Maine in their first real stand-up fight on Little Round Top. He performs well. I don't think there's any way around that. He performs well. And he survives. He survives, which a lot of his contemporaries did not. So after the American Civil War is over, and as I mentioned, for Joshua Chamberlain, that is the definitive moment of his life, Little Round Top. After the war is over, he's the guy that gets to write the history, because O'Rourke is dead, Vincent is dead, Hazlitt is dead, Warren will die early, and he never wrote about it anyways, and even lesser individuals, like James Rice, who takes over brigade command after Vincent is mortally wounded. He's killed at Spotsylvania. Norval Welch, who commands the 16th Michigan on the far right, is killed at Peebles Farm in 1864. So Chamberlain's the only guy left standing. And so he tells his story. But Joshua Chamberlain is a perfect example of how complex history can be, because even Joshua Chamberlain can't figure out what happened. So let's take a look at one moment in the Battle of Little Round Top, just one. That's the charge of the 20th Maine. How did that happen? On July 6, 1863, Joshua Chamberlain will write his first account of the Battle of Gettysburg. His first account. And here's what he says about the charge of the 20th Maine. And I've made the relevant section slightly larger. That's why I did that. So Chamberlain says, "It was too evident that we could maintain the defensive no longer. As a last desperate resort, I ordered a charge. The word fixed bayonet flew from man to man. So I ordered a charge. Now, March of 1884, he hears other accounts that confuse him. He's trying to reconcile his version of history with what he wants it to be and with what everybody else is saying. And he's hearing accounts from men saying, you know, I don't recall hearing a thing about a charge. I saw the regiment going down the hill, so that's what I did. And so he changes his story a little bit. This is in, again, 1884. In March, he writes, "At the crisis, I ordered the bayonet. The word was enough. So I didn't order a charge, I ordered the bayonet." October 3rd, 1889, at the dedication of the 20th Maine Monument, writing about the order, speaking about the order, he says, "In fact, to tell the truth, the order was never given, or but imperfectly. So I gave the order, but not quite correctly." 1913, he writes, "Through Blood and Fire at Gettysburg," which is published in Hertz magazine, meant for popular consumption. And in Through Blood and Fire of Gettysburg, regarding the bayonet charge, he says, "One word was enough, bayonet. It caught like fire and swept along the ranks. The men took it up with a shout. One could not say whether from the pit or the song of the morning star, it were vain to order forward. No mortal could have heard it in the mighty hosanna that was winging the sky." And so now he's saying, you know, even if I said it, no one could hear it because it was so loud. And so with something as simple as the charge of the 20th Maine, even Chamberlain is trying to figure out, okay, what the heck happened up there? And Chamberlain was never the guy that would argue with you. He tried to fit his story, reconcile his story with yours, which is something he actually says to some men up on the hill at the dedication of the 20th Maine Monument. But there's no denying the fact that Chamberlain, again, that time at Little Round Top, that was his pinnacle. In 1893, on August 1st, he receives a Congressional Medal of Honor for daring heroism and great tenacity in holding his position on the Little Round Top against repeated assaults and carrying the advanced position on the Great Round Top. He gets a Medal of Honor, and Chamberlain is incredibly proud of it. The Medal of Honor in the late 19th century is a relatively new thing. It's created during the American Civil War. Prior to that, the United States military really didn't have medals the way that we think of them today. You know, Winfield Scott, I think in 1862, said, you know, giving medals smacked of European affectation. You know, a Frenchman might fight for ribbons and baubles, but an American fights for America. That changes over time. They introduced the Medal of Honor, and during the war years, the best way to receive a Medal of Honor was to capture a battle flag. It was something tangible. So most of the original Medals of Honor awarded for the Battle of Gettysburg are awarded for capturing a Confederate color, capturing a battle flag. That changes over time, and it becomes kind of like the Wild West. In the 1880s and early 1890s, you had all these soldiers that liked the idea of getting a Medal of Honor, and so they're writing to the government saying, "I did all these great things, give me a medal." And you have other men campaigning for one. Well, Joshua Chamberlain finds out that one of his good friends, Alexander Webb, got a Medal of Honor. And Chamberlain wanted one too. He wanted one very badly. And so he basically writes to Webb and says, you know, "Tell me how you did it. How'd you get it?" And Chamberlain's well connected. Remember, he becomes governor of Maine. He's politically savvy. He's one of the old, you know, heroes from the state of Maine. And he ultimately will receive his Medal of Honor. And you notice the citation doesn't even talk about the charge, just for tenacity and holding his position and carrying it up to the big round top. To get a medal, you had to have witnesses that could attest to your heroism. Let me show you Joshua Chamberlain's witnesses. These are the guys that said, yes, he did that, he's a hero. John Porter, Thomas Hubbard, and Alexander Webb. One, you're probably wondering who in the world is Thomas Hubbard. He didn't fight at the Battle of Gettysburg, but he was from Maine. John Porter, what's he doing in 1863 on July 2nd? He ain't at Little Round Top. Alexander Webb's at Gettysburg, but he's down on Cemetery Ridge. So these are the three men that write testimony saying that Chamberlain should be awarded the medal for what he did at Little Round Top. Do I think Chamberlain earned the medal, even by maybe today's standards? I think he did. I don't think that detracts from Chamberlain, but the simple fact of the matter was there weren't a whole lot of people still living in 1893 that could chime in on what he did. And Chamberlain would write that. He said, "For my particular case, I am unfortunate in the fact that the people who could be witnesses of any special acts of mine in battle fell victim to their environment. They were mostly all killed. I think that's a fair statement, but he gets the medal. And that further kind of enshrines Chamberlain in American mythology. I love this story. Chamberlain guarded the battlefield at Gettysburg, especially Little Round Top, especially Vincent Spur. He guarded that place very jealously. That was where people were going to come to remember what he and the men of the 20th Maine did. And he's well connected politically, like I said. He abhorred the fact that visitors would go to commune with the authenticity of the hill, would go and visit the 20th Maine Monument on Vincent Spur and see stone walls where his men fought. Because they didn't have time to build stone walls. They're there 5-10 minutes before the Confederate attack. And so they had to use whatever natural protection the hill afforded. They didn't have time to stack up rock. Now, if you're a visitor, you go to Vincent Spur today, you see those 2 nice rows of stone wall following the sidewalk ending at the 20th Maine. And most visitors think, oh, that's where they fought behind. They fought behind the walls. Chamberlain hated that. And his last act, he's literally writing in 1913, a year before he dies. His last act is to pester that guy on the right, John Page Nicholson, who's chairman of the Gettysburg Battlefield, the commission, pestering him to take those stone walls down on Vincent Spur, get rid of them. And we have the correspondence in our vertical files today, and they're fantastic because Chamberlain is just such a nuisance over it. Now, John Page Nicholson, he had to deal with some stuff. Condemnation hearings, lawsuits, Dan Sickles, and he had to deal with a lot. And for him to say that it has been one of my great trials at Gettysburg not to yield to General Chamberlain's request to remove the wall, that's saying something. Because that guy, he's been around the block. And so ultimately, if you go to Little Round Top today, as you drive up the summit, on the right-hand side is a small tablet. It says, this wall was built for defense, July 3rd, p.m., 1863. That is John Page Nicholson's attempt to appease Joshua Chamberlain. I'll put up the marker that says the walls weren't there. As far as I know, that is the only marker on the Gettysburg battlefield whose sole purpose is to correct a misconception. And that's because of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Next time you drive past, you can thank him. Chamberlain, he had a tendency to rub people the wrong way. In part because a lot of individuals who also fought at Little Round Top saw Chamberlain, his writing, his quest for the Medal of Honor, his speechifying. They saw it as an affront to other individuals who fought on the Hill, who died, and who weren't getting the credit they felt that those individuals deserved. Strong Vincent, Patrick O'Rourke, et cetera, et cetera. Ellis Spears, the second in command of the 20th Maine. He lives a long life. And he's very close to Chamberlain. They are cordial. They have a very cordial relationship throughout both of their lives. But especially after Chamberlain dies, and Ellis Spear reads more and more about what Chamberlain wrote, he gets increasingly frustrated with Chamberlain and how he's telling the story of the Battle of Little Round Top. He writes to Oliver Wilcox Norton about Chamberlain's official report and says, Chamberlain's report is a fabric of lies, as far from the truth as well could be. And then he later goes on to say in another letter to Strong Vincent's brother, I never had any but kindly feelings towards Chamberlain, but saw so much of his egotism that I could not write otherwise. And Spear would go on to tell a story about Chamberlain at a Bowdoin College commencement. And Spear is on staff at Bowdoin as well, and Chamberlain by this point is president of the college. And they're having commencement, so all the students are in their seats, and it's kind of the kickoff to the academic year. And Spear writes that he watches Chamberlain walk down the center of the aisle past students, and these students see Chamberlain, and they start to whisper to themselves and to each other, there's the man that took Little Round Top. And Chamberlain hears this, and according to Spear's account, Chamberlain stops, turns to these students that are whispering about him, and says, yes, I took it, and I held it. And he kept on walking. And Spear says that when he heard that, he thought it was like robbing the dead. He should have said to those students, no, that title belongs to Strong Vincent. So that's kind of how Chamberlain would rub people the wrong way. My favorite My absolute favorite letter associated with the Battle of Little Round Top is written by Ellis Spear in, what's the year, 1910, to his granddaughter Mildred, who's all of 9 years old at that time. And it's a sweet letter, because it's a granddaughter who knows that their grandfather fought at the Battle of Gettysburg. And it's, I think, curious to want to know what what life was like, what events you were a part of. And so that's a natural question, Granddad, what was the Battle of Gettysburg like? And that's what she asks Ellis Spear. And by this point in his life, Spear is just so jaded with all of this. The back and forth, who's the hero of Little Round Top, who was there, that he writes, again, I think the best letter of any Little Round Top veteran to his granddaughter. And he writes, "Dear Mildred, I was very much surprised to learn from your letter that you were not at the Battle of Gettysburg. So many people were there that I do not fully understand how you missed it. It is not unreasonable, therefore, that you should wish to know something about it. I fear you will never know all about it. Nobody does, and nobody ever did, nor ever will. It was a very mixed up and extensive affair." I think that's the best caption to a Little Round Top program that you can possibly have. No single factor will elevate the story of Little Round Top to the pantheon of American high culture than the popular culture. That drives visitation to historic sites, book sales. It's that. And of course, the story of Little Round Top has been featured in works of fiction and nonfiction meant for public consumption. So really important is a book written by John J. Pullen in the 1950s. It's a regimental history of the 20th Maine. So after Chamberlain dies, there's this dormancy in terms of the story of Little Round Top. There's years where if you're a visitor, you're going to go to Little Round Top. You're going to take in the sweeping view. Warren might be your hero because there's this big statue, and that's kind of it. With the publication of that regimental history, though, it reintroduces Americans to this guy, Joshua Chamberlain. It's actually included in a Reader's Digest condensed version. So if you don't have time to read the whole thing, you can kind of go through the 20-page version of the story of the 20th Maine. That will inspire Michael Shara, who writes The Killer Angels, a novelization of the Battle of Gettysburg, where one of the main characters is Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, this college professor from Maine who performs heroics on Little Round Top and saves the day. And that in turn, of course, inspires Ken Burns' The Civil War series. There's no more dominant character in his Gettysburg section than Joshua Chamberlain. It's basically the entirety of the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg is the story of Joshua Chamberlain and the men of the 20th Maine. And of course, Gettysburg. Filmed in 1992, I believe it hits theaters in 1993. That movie transforms Little Round Top in very fundamental ways. The site all of a sudden goes back to being this place of pilgrimage for Americans. Visitation to Gettysburg increases by 400,000 people the year after that movie comes out. 400,000 people. Now, the National Park Service had removed what was called Chamberlain Avenue, which is the path that exists today that kind of takes you around the spur. It was overgrown. It was the backwaters of Little Round Top. And as a result of that movie, the trail's brought back, and now all of a sudden it's the Joshua Chamberlain Superhighway that brings you right down to the 20th Maine Monument. And then you have Jeff Daniels as Chamberlain. When most Americans, when they think of Joshua Chamberlain, they think of this guy. It's this dude. And one of the most difficult things for historians, or I assume battlefield guides, to do is divorce Jeff Daniels as Joshua Chamberlain from Joshua Chamberlain. It's very difficult to do because the Hollywood persona has just kind of overwhelmed the historical reality. On the other hand, though, I think one of the reasons why we're so drawn to Chamberlain is because of Daniel's portrayal based off of Shara's novel. Chamberlain is kind of an everyman, right? It's easy to put yourself in Chamberlain's boots and pretend you're this guy who, on your resume, you got nothing on it that says, yeah, you're going to be a leader of men in combat and you're going to perform heroics. But I think it allows people to imagine that they themselves, in moments of crisis, could do what Chamberlain could do. And Chamberlain's kind of nerdy, and a lot of us are kind of nerdy, and that's okay. We can still be great leaders on the battlefield. You know, I make this joke. I've had a lot of really brilliant college professors. I've had a lot of very smart people teach me. I don't know how many I'd follow into battle. I don't know how many I'd let change the oil in my car. Chamberlain proves that wrong, that no matter what little box you fit in, you can do great things outside of that. And I think that's one of the reasons why Little Round Top's so famous. It's because of Joshua Chamberlain as portrayed in popular media. And of course that corresponds to all the swag and tchotchkes. I did not realize there was a Joshua Chamberlain onesie until I started this. I might get it. Action figures. He's got his own action figures. When I was 9 years old, I saw this in Walmart, and I had to have it, and I still have it today. I don't think they packaged this as a set, but Joshua Chamberlain Legos. And I love this more than anything. Nothing says America like craft beer named after Joshua. That is the pinnacle. You don't get any higher than that. He's made it. And actually, I think Chamberlain, as a figure, as a product of history and folklore, has outlived the movie. Because I ask visitors, especially younger visitors today, have you seen the movie Gettysburg? Most of them say no. But he's infiltrated all these other aspects of our lives. He's featured in television shows. He's kind of this guy that, again, has made that bridge to our modern consciousness. And then finally, Joshua's Tavern. If you ever go, O'Rourke has a bar, as we all know, a restaurant here, so he's covered. Brunswick, Maine has Joshua's Tavern. So you can go have a Chamberlain beer in your Chamberlain Tavern and go look at the statue of Chamberlain and visit his house. So why Little Round Top? Why are we so fascinated with it? What draws us to that place? I think it's a combination of factors. It is a beautiful place. It is a dynamic place. It is, even if you, again, have no knowledge of the American Civil War, it's a spot that you can visit and be impressed by. It's a dramatic landscape. That's one reason. The fact that it's fought over in one of the pivotal battles of American history is another. The veterans who fought there crafted a commemorative landscape on that hill that still impresses us today. So when we see the Warren statue or the Castle Monument to the 44th New York, that is impressive to us. The participants of the battle, they wrote about it. They enshrined it in memory. They fought over it. It's a great example of how history and memory are different things. But I think more than any of that, Little Round Top is a place where we go to connect with the past. It's a link to the generation that fought the American Civil War. And the veterans who fought there would write about that dynamic. One is Porter Farley. At the dedication of the 140th New York Monument, he would say this: "A visit to this field cannot be regarded as a mere holiday excursion. It recalls the most dreadful recollections, suggests the most serious thoughts. It nevertheless seems, after this lapse of years, to be invested with a haze, which casts upon the picture as we reproduce it in our memory a semblance of unreality, which almost makes us doubt our waking senses and ask ourselves, can these things have really happened?" And then there's Chamberlain, who at the end of his last account of the Battle of Gettysburg, through blood and fire, would write this: "I sat there alone on the storied crest till the sun went down as it did before over the misty hills, and the darkness crept up the slopes till from all earthly sight I was buried as with those before. But oh, what radiant companionship rose around, what steadfast ranks of power, what bearing of heroic souls. Oh, the glory that beamed through those nights and days, nobody will know it here. I am most sorry of all for that." And I think what he's saying, and what I think also Farley is saying, is that people want something real, right? When you go to a place like Gettysburg and you go to Little Round Top, it's a powerful thing. I think it's why we visit historic spaces and places. It connects us with the past. So when Chamberlain goes to Little Round Top as an old man, it connects him to those young men he fought with on July 2nd, 1863. It connects Porter Farley to his good friend, like a brother, Patrick O'Rourke. And I think that's why 1 million Americans visit the Hill today. Yeah, they're inspired by the movies, and maybe they had a Chamberlain beer, but they're looking to connect with something, to connect with the past, and to make it real. So that's my program for you today. Before I completely let you go, Little Round Top rehabilitation is still going on. And what we're trying to do with that is make sure the hill lasts for another generation. So we're improving parking, we're improving the trails, we're stabilizing erosion, we're restacking a lot of those defensive works that were the result of the battle. We're adding new historic signage that'll hopefully give you a better experience when you visit the hill, whether you're a licensed battlefield guide or a regular visitor or you're on your field trip. The work is estimated to last 18 months, and of course, as you all know, every government project ahead of schedule and under budget. So I have no doubt this will be the case here. If you are interested in the story of Little Round Top, February 5th, it's a Sunday, myself, as well as our park archaeologist, will be here to talk about the rehabilitation, but more specifically, the archaeology that is being done as part of that. As historians, we're all working with the same stuff. We got the same accounts, same photographs, same letters. I think the archaeology that's happening at Little Round Top, though, is going to potentially lead us to draw some new conclusions about the fighting, what happened there. And archaeology, battlefield archaeology, fascinating stuff. What they found, I think you'll be blown away. So I encourage you to come back Sunday, February 5th. Have a good day. Have a safe day. Thank you again for visiting us.
Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted. Greg said, my unit has purchased from him in the past quality badges and good service. And Jerry S. says, the Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg.
Our hearts so stout have got us famed, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and ale,